Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to the Woo Curious podcast. Your map to the mystical, your key to the sacred, and your guide back home to yourself. I'm Eileen, a writer, a spiritual coach, energy healer, and slow living witch. This podcast is your invitation to explore a world where the mundane and the sacred intertwine. It's a haven for those ready to take the first steps into the realms of magic and mystery, providing a safe space for you to embark on your own enchanted journey towards healing and self-discovery. Here, I'll unveil the whispers of the mystical, the rituals often hidden in plain sight, and I'll engage in sacred conversation intended to stir your soul and lead you back into your power. I'm all about demystifying woo and witchcraft. So, whether you're a seasoned seeker or simply woo curious, I'm so delighted you've decided to join me on this journey. Let's make magic. Hello, and welcome back, Woo Crew, to another episode of the Woo Curious podcast. I am your host, Eileen, and today's episode is a solo episode. If you're noticing that the sound is a little bit different than usual, it's because I am out in Jordan River visiting a dear friend before heading off to retreat this weekend. By the time you're listening, retreat will be over, but just barely. And I'm super excited to gather with all my female entrepreneur friends and have a weekend of rejuvenation and all of the things that we get to do. We'll be diving into some sound bath journeys, some breathwork journeying, lots of visioning, lots of shedding layers and leaving behind what's no longer serving and stepping into our highest vision. Which leads me to today's episode. So when I was sitting and thinking about what I wanted to share with you all today, a topic that keeps coming around and is really important is distinguishing between intuition and anxiety and FOMO. And I'm going to make a whole episode on specifically that because the intuition episodes, I know that you all are really enjoying them. I can see on the back end that they are really popular, and it is something that I think a lot of us struggle with, is connecting to our intuition. And if we can connect and hear it and we know what it sounds or feels like in our bodies, often it's hard to trust it. And so this topic, even though I'm not going to specifically dive deep into that side of it today, it is connected to what I'm going to be talking about today, because part of the trouble with trusting our intuition is that often it goes in the face of what we've been conditioned to think, do, act, behave, all of those pieces. So what I want to talk about today is tied into the free 4-day live guided journey that I'm going to be holding from June 17th to June 20th at noon Mountain Standard Time. It will of course be recorded. You're probably hearing this from me for the multiple times at this point, but it's called Shine, and it's a guided journey to step into your authenticity. We had Bloom back in March where we stepped into our power, and part of stepping into power is also aligning with and embracing our authenticity. Authenticity is a bit of a buzzword, I feel like. I heard someone say it's the word of the year for 2024. I don't know from whom or who makes these decisions. It's not my word of the year. Mine is courage. But it is a word that's getting thrown around a lot, and it is important. But often when we hear, be authentic, be yourself, step into your authenticity, it can be a little bit difficult to know what exactly that means. And for many of us, I really think that it's tough sometimes to know what our authenticity, our most authentic selves are, who they are, how they feel, what they want. This has come up recently. I've been talking about this in a few different channels of the Beltane ceremony that I held, where we talked about claiming your passions and embracing them and creating more time for them. And a really common theme was that the women present, many of them, struggled to even know what they were passionate about because they had spent their whole lives tending to other people's passions or putting other people's needs or wants or desires ahead of their own. So the same thing can happen with authenticity. If you hear it clicking in the background, there's a dog in the room with me walking around. But the same thing can be said for authenticity. Often it's really hard to connect with, what is it that our authenticity asks of us, or who is our most authentic self, or what it means to live into our authenticity, to be our most authentic selves, because we've spent a lifetime often disconnecting from the authentic parts of ourselves. If you've ever read Brene Brown, you may have encountered some of this idea before, but this is tying back into our neurobiology, like the way that we are wired, the way that we are as human animals wired is to prioritize connection and belonging above pretty much everything else, because belonging and being connected and being part of the group at a physiological, animal level means surviving. And you've heard me talk about it before, but our brains are wired to keep us alive. They don't care if we are happy and joyful and finding meaning and purpose in our lives. Your brain just wants to keep you alive. And being part of a group, belonging and connection is a really good way to keep you alive in a world that is dangerous. And so this comes up when we think about living into our authenticity, because for so many of us, from the time that we are young, we are putting aside the way that we would genuinely show up in the world. We put aside our likes, we put aside our desires, we put aside our needs in order to fit in and conform, to be accepted. So when I start to talk about stepping into your authenticity, the first step is really just to acknowledge that it may not be something that you can connect with really easily, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. It doesn't mean that you won't be able to find that connection, but that's why it's so much of the work that I do with my clients is about coming home to themselves, right? Finding that pathway home to yourself, reconnecting with who you are when we strip away all of the layers of conditioning that's been foisted upon us. My friend Meg and I were chatting this morning over our coffee about how this culture has really imposed or transcribed this desire for material goods onto so many of us. We're both reading a book called Mind Magic, and it's about the neuroscience of manifestation. And right in the introduction, I was immediately like, aha, somebody's saying it. The beef that I have with so much of the manifestation stuff out there, the material, the people speaking about it, is that it's so often about, the house, the car, the vacations, the things. When that is a capitalistic, linear, more consumption is good and is progress type thinking, when what really imbues life with meaning and depth and joy is connection, is belonging, is I'm coming back. Do you see what I'm doing here? And so we can conform, we can fit ourselves into the box of what society seems to be asking of us in order to fit in or belong with certain people. But if we are doing things or being someone or, living into a life that doesn't feel authentic and aligned for us, even though we belong, there's that piece of safety there, we're going to struggle to find true connection. and true depth of meaning and purpose. And so when we start to think about rediscovering ourselves, reconnecting, and then beginning to make decisions and lead a life that is more authentic, that feels more aligned with our true values, our true desires, it can be really scary. And this is where it kind of comes back to that intuition. Is it anxiety? Is it fear of missing out? Fear of missing out is very much a like, I need to belong and connect kind of reaction, right? Anxiety can be social anxiety, often comes from living out of alignment and having to go into social situations where you're putting on a mask, where you're pretending, where it's uncomfortable for you, for your body, for your mind to be in those situations, even though you think you want to be there or you feel like you should want to be there. And so what happens when we start to live into our authenticity and make decisions based on it is that often we will start to lose relationships. And so that feels scary. It's really hard to do. Your brain goes, danger. Like it's telling you that it's not a good idea. So again, really being so tender and patient with yourself. If you're starting to think about these things, if you're starting to connect in and identify, what it is you want, how you want to be in the world, and if it's coming like butting up against how you've always been in the world or how your peer group or your family expects you to be in the world, know that it's really normal to feel some tension, some conflict there, especially in the beginning. As with everything else, it's a practice, it's a softening. When you think about leaning into your authenticity, it's that allowing yourself to be right, let yourself be right. If it feels like shit, it's probably not a good place to stay. And the move away from that inauthentic way of being is also not going to be comfortable, unfortunately. It's not like, this feels uncomfortable, I'm just going to go into what does feel comfortable. In a vacuum, in a void, it would feel comfortable. It would feel like it fills you up and fuels you and feels great. But you're not in a void. You are every day interacting with people, and many of whom you've been interacting with in a certain way for a really long time. And so there's all sorts of different pieces to start to navigate as you start to think about, okay, what does it mean for me to live in alignment, to live authentically, to step into my authenticity? And it feels vulnerable. And the reality is that often when you do start down these paths of coming into alignment with yourself, you will likely lose some people from your life. They may be gone entirely, or you might just start to notice that there's a distance forming between you. Perhaps you no longer have the desire to spend time with them. Perhaps you do, but the nature of your connection shifts and changes. And that feels, again, to your primal brain, really unsettling. But what I can promise you is that as you start to do this and show up in that authentic way, you will start to magnetize people to you who appreciate you for who you really are. And this is perhaps one of the most magical pieces of coming home to yourself, coming home to your body, to your desires, to your needs, of beginning to find the courage to speak your truths, to ask to have your needs met, to set those healthy boundaries, is that the people who aren't okay with that shift will fall away, sometimes not without a bit of a conflict, not always without them, saying they're disappointed. But what happens on the flip side is that you would start to attract people into your life who appreciate the authentic you and want to connect with the real, aligned, authentic you, who are respectful of your boundaries, who appreciate and want to cater to your needs, just as you enjoy caring for the people that you love and their needs, right? And so it feels so uncomfortable in the beginning, but as the shift starts to happen, as you're able to lean into it more and more and start to create new relationships with people who are loving you for the authenticity that you bring, it's like the biggest sigh of relief for your nervous system to be able to show up in a place and not have to worry about what you're going to say or what you should wear or look like or how you should act or what opinions are off limits or you shouldn't voice with these people because they're not okay to bring up, right? It's so much less work for your brain and therefore for your body. Your nervous system gets to relax, the stress levels go down, that anxiety can sometimes go all the way away because you haven't been hiding, because you don't have to mask. And yes, there's always going to be certain parts of our lives where we kind of have to show up and keep parts of ourselves closed. I'm not saying you should show up with your whole heart on your sleeve in every single situation, because not everybody's ready to meet you there. Not everybody's ready to meet your authenticity. And so if it's a space that you have to navigate, maybe it's your immediate family, parents, aunties, uncles, siblings, people that you don't want to end your relationship with. Sometimes we do have to tread carefully. And I think it's also worth broaching the topic and talking about it. This is one of the things that I really love doing with my clients is as we start to navigate these shifts, tapping back into those parts of self that maybe have been really dormant or pushed down or quiet for a long time, changing the relationship with things like rest and needs and all of that stuff. One of the coolest things to do that I love helping my clients do is figure out how to bring their families, their partners, their kiddos along for the journey. Because something that can happen when we dive into these kind of personal growth spaces is it can feel like it is a very internal journey. And so sometimes what happens is we're like doing the work, but we're still in the same patterns of behavior and communication with our loved ones. And so a few months in, a few years in, we feel like a totally different person, and we are, but we haven't brought them along for the ride. And so that's often when those relationships get tricky to navigate and almost feel like they need to fall by the wayside for us to continue on in our most authentic lives. And so if you're able, as you start to navigate these spaces, as you start to lean into your authenticity, to just talk about what it is you're thinking about and exploring and learning and doing with the people that matter most to you, then you're able to bring them along for the journey, and probably you're going to do them a world of good. This is where that ripple effect starts to happen. When I think about rested women will change the world, I think about that pebble dropping into the pond and the woman who is able to rest and care for her needs and be her authentic and powerful self. The impact of that touches her children, her partner, her friends, her coworkers, and it just ripples out through society. And so if you are taking the first steps, those courageous steps to begin to step back in, or maybe for the first time, step into your authenticity, bring everyone in your life along for the ride and see what happens. I think it's just such a cool place to land. Okay, I didn't talk, as I kind of said I would, about the anxiety and the FOMO much. I hinted at it. I am going to make an episode specifically to address how to differentiate between anxiety, FOMO, and intuition, because I think that's important too. It's a big piece of how I help women reconnect with themselves and that trust in themselves. But if this conversation around authenticity, around connecting back in and starting to lean into a more authentic life so that you can I've been saying this a lot lately, but like suck the marrow out of this delicious life and create a life that you feel so blessed to be able to wake up and be in every day. If that sounds good to you, if you're feeling that tug, please consider joining me for Shine. Again, that is happening from June 17th to 20th. It will be recorded, just like with Bloom. I am offering prizes for engagement, and that can mean coming live, but that can also mean watching the replays and just letting me know. I actually hate when there are prizes for attending live and they don't extend to the people who are genuinely engaging in the material but just actually can't make the time. I don't want to punish somebody because their schedule doesn't allow for them to show up live. So there will be prizes for engaging with the material, either coming live, watching the replays and letting me know, for sharing about the experience, because again, I want this to ripple out that pebble in the pond. So if you're interested, maybe you've got a girlfriend who you think could really benefit from this, invite her along personally. Send her an invitation and say, hey, join me for this thing. Join me for this journey. Just like with Bloom, there'll be some teaching, but there'll also be those guided visualizations that are so powerful. And I'm really, really excited and starting to pull together the ideas for what we're going to talk about, what we're going to dive into. The guided journey piece will be intuitive and channeled just like last time, because that's the way I work. But it's a free offer. Please join me and let me know how you like this episode. If you enjoyed it, share it with a friend, leave a rating, a review. It helps so much. Don't forget to tag me. I've recently changed my Instagram handle, so it's at I am Eileen March and or at the.woocurious.podcast. And I will talk to you next week. I will be back with a special guest again. So I can't wait to drop into your ears then, and wishing you all a beautiful first week of June. Bye for now.